Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Should we go ahead and get started?
I think so.
I'm going to do my best to be a competent conversation leader today after a heck of a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I had COVID in the last couple of weeks. I'm recovering, but it was not fun. And now I am in Ventura. So this is my cute little Airbnb behind me because my two eldest daughters just graduated from college.
That's so exciting. But Lisa, I do have to ask why you're not conducting the Zoom meeting from the swing back
From
there.
the swing. Yes, I should be. So let's see. Should we just, I'm going to take the same approach and go through chapter by chapter. Some of you may have seen that I presented a new challenge, which was to come up with a chapter title drawn from within some phrases from within the chapter. I don't know if anybody took on this challenge, but I think it'll be fun. Yeah, I'm sure you did. It'll be fun I mean, it's just kind of a fun activity to do in general, but also I thought it would be interesting again to see how we can condense what we see as the essence of that chapter into a phrase, if that's possible, and if we have the same ideas about that. I don't know if anybody needs to like purge general thoughts about these chapters because it's quite an ordeal to go through. This it's a pretty, well, she is a maiden no more.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go on.
No, please go.
It's okay. So clearly at the end of part one, she is raped, and that is truly terrible. And the way that it's described / not described is heart-wrenching. And I've read this, I think I read this section over a few times, and I've obviously read the book before, and I cried every single time. But the thing that I want to just like purge from my soul first is the chapter with Alec driving her in the dog cart. It makes me so angry every time I read it. Like I get like my heart starts to beat faster because it's just this. The thing that bothers me so much about it is just it's so brazen. Like he's just trying to show how powerful he is by just like making this horse run as fast as possible and by scaring her. And it gets my blood pressure up. And it's also just, I think, like that's the moment when you know like she needs to go home or something terrible is going to happen. And so from that point on, you're just kind of like on the edge of your seat and like hoping that it's not going to happen. And then at the end of part one, when she's raped, you're kind of like, okay, well, I guess it's been leading to this the whole time. It's very disturbing. So that's why I wanted to purge it. Purged. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's go back chapter by chapter, and then we can take a bird's eye view on it at the end again too. So going all the way back to chapter 5, if I step back and look at chapter 5, what seems important is the introduction of the character of Alec, everything, all of the misery of this is so effectively compounded. I was thinking to myself, reflecting on these chapters this morning, that I don't know that I know of any novel with a more malevolent universe than this one, where it's malevolent in the sense of the character of, the figure of Alec and the her parents and her home life, and that is malevolent, but the universe itself is malevolent. It's not just the people are malevolent, the universe is fundamentally malevolent. So every time chance plays a role in the chapter, chance compounds the misery always. So it's such a dismal universe to inhabit, because you see this character that you become attached to, who's so innocent and pure and good and trying to make the best of everything, and everything is against her. The people in her life and reality itself always. And it's very philosophically explicit about that too, that it said that it's there will often be passages about why is it that things could go well, but in fact they go
We don't.
terribly wrong. Who knows? But that's just the way of the world.
It's because it's a blighted star.
It's a blighted star. That's right.
It's so, you're right. It is just deeply miserable.
Mhm.
And like, even I know you were talking about not chapter 10, but just like right at the beginning of chapter 10, the line about every village has its idiosyncrasy, its own code of morality. And in this one, they drink hard. Like, that's just the way of the world. That's the way it is. So you're right. It's just steeped in like everything is kind of, even if it looks great, it's kind of
Right. And he layers the horror of the situation that there are, one thing is layered on top of another. Okay, so she's being sent to claim kin, and you have this sense of doom and apprehension about the fact of her doing that. But to make it worse, they don't have a noble name at all. It's all phony. So it always has to be one step worse than you think it possibly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that
like,
was
the fact that she's doing that is bad, but also they're not even who she thinks
they're
they
not even who there's not even a reason for her to be doing that in the first place.
Right.
So let's see. So, and also, okay, so let's just look at chapter 5. She still thinks she murdered the horse. She still feels this sense of moral responsibility. And so she'll endure and do things she wouldn't otherwise because of this sense of guilt. So then she goes, we're told they're not even D'Urbervilles in any real sense. They can't claim that name in any meaningful sense. It's just, it was as good as any other when they were looking for a noble name to attach to themselves. And so we know she has this false guilt. We know she's going into this phony situation. And then Alec is introduced. And he's creepy and horrifying from moment one.
Yes. Again, last week we talked, or 2 weeks ago, we talked so much about the way that Thomas Hardy introduces characters. And here's another brilliant introduction of just like the creepiest dude ever. Like, even he keeps talking about him holding the cigar between his teeth, and I'm just like,
that's gross. Let's see, I wrote down phrases like his groomed black mustache. I mean, that's making us suspicious, but the barbarism in his contours.
I wrote that one down too.
Yeah. And then, so I don't know if you want to pick a most horrifying moment from this chapter, but the strawberry incident.
Yeah. No, I shake my head no, and I say but only because that's exactly it.
Because you can't bear that. You can't bear that scene. I know it's really obviously a foretaste of what's to come, but it's just such a disgusting scene.
It's so disgusting. And even just the image of the roses going into her bosom and her hair, and then the strawberry too, and then like kind of wearing that on herself as she leaves, like still being covered in roses and not realizing that everybody's looking at her.
I know.
It's
yeah, okay, I'll come back to that later. But and then there are all the lines that I mentioned before about the inescapability of fate and just the capriciousness, the evil capriciousness of reality. So it has that moment where it says, Tess stood still, hesitating like a bather about to make his plunge, hardly knowing whether to retreat or persevere. Retreat. When a figure came forth from the dark triangular door of the tent. So there's a moment where she could retreat. She's indecisive. She's pushed by fate again right into the horror of this situation.
Yeah.
And then there was the line, oh gosh, I didn't write down the page number, but about her missing counterpart wandering the earth.
Yes.
That line.
Yes. Yes.
So it's something that she might have been saved, or she might have
avoided it entirely.
But reality thwarted her again. I don't know if anybody else can find that line.
Yeah,
but I underlined it.
It's right near the end of the chapter.
Right near the end. Okay. Thanks. Oh yes, a missing counterpart wandered independently about the earth, waiting in crass obtuseness till the late time came, out of which maladroit delay sprang
Yeah.
sprang anxieties, disappointments, shocks, catastrophes, and passing strange destinies.
Yeah.
All right, should we share our quote and chapter title?
Yes, you can go first.
Because you probably wrote yours down, so you can prove whether we chose the second.
I didn't write them down this
Oh,
time.
you didn't write them down, but your lovely handwriting on your little.
I was packing.
Okay,
So I didn't have pens or
she moved this weekend, so. Okay, I chose, he watched her pretty and unconscious munching through the skeins of smoke that pervaded the tent, and Tess D'Urbyville did not divine, as she innocently looked down at the roses in her bosom, that there behind the blue narcotic haze was potentially the tragic mischief of her drama, one who stood fair to be the blood red ray in the spectrum of her young life.
Yeah, that's the one I chose.
So, chapter title?
Chapter title. Okay, I cheated. I couldn't choose between two.
Okay.
So I have two. I chose, and they're both kind of inspired by that same passage. So the first one was the blood red ray, because I thought that was really dramatic. And then I also, less dramatically, just wrote the wrong man.
Oh, was that a phrase drawn from the chapter, or did it was?
So that's why I chose, that's why I stuck with the blood red ray, and then just kind of like kept that in there because I don't remember if it says exactly that he was the wrong man, but it's talking about like the right man and the wrong man. So that's why I kind of like spun it a little bit and was like, this is the wrong man.
Okay. So mine was essentially the same as your blood red ray, but I just chose a different phrase, which was the tragic mischief.
Yes. I like that one too.
Does anybody have any comments or thoughts you want to share about chapter 5 before we go on to chapter 6? I don't know if anybody else organized their thoughts in chapters, so I may, if you want to wait till the end, but if anybody wants.
Yes, Stephanie has his hand up.
Great.
So I just came up with the title. I chose the same quote as you guys. Mine is in the middle of a sentence, but it's a family name came by nature.
And do you want to explain what made you choose that one?
Yeah, just kind of the determinism and the fatalism of the nature of the story, you know, where it's just irrelevant whether it's the family name or not, just a creepy guy, and it just shows the stupidity of heredity. So
yeah, I liked one of the things I liked about tragic mischief is that it combines the evil of the characters and the fatalism of the universe all in one concise phrase. Okay, should we move on to the next chapter?
Wendell also had
okay, great.
What a crummy girl.
Oh,
that's what he says when she leaves. I had to look that up because I was like, what is crummy? Like, are you delectable, like the crumbs? Yeah. There was I have an edition that has some notes in the back, and there was an annotation for that. And I guess in previous versions, it's been various versions of like the same thing. And crummy, I think, is like the most disgusting that line gets. At first, just like, oh, what a charming girl and stuff like that. But then as like, I think I forget exactly how many versions of this book there have been, but by the time you get to the end, it's like Alec is fully disgusting. And in the very first version that was released, I think Tess's name was Sue. And instead of raping her, he like tricks her into marrying him. Because of like the Victorian sensibilities. But by the time you get to the end, everything is like fully Thomas Hardy, fully like just as bad as we're seeing now.
So in terms of, like, I know we have Shoshana here, so I don't know if you can comment on this, but whether the ambiguity of the rape scene or how it's sort of what actually happens is not explicitly described, is that Victorian sensibilities? Because in some ways it made it more horrific to me not to have experienced the details.
Right.
There was something about just seeing her figure, the white muslin on the dead leaves, and then, you know, this ominous sense of what's going to happen, that I found very powerful. But I don't know, Do you have anything to say about that, Shoshana?
Well, I think it's certainly true that audiences of the time would have definitely understood what was happening. And when you teach this, sometimes students are a little puzzled what just happened. And
Yes.
I don't know if you know Adam Bede, some of the students are very surprised when a certain character turns out to be pregnant. You know, how did that happen? And right, but the Victorian audiences would have known what it meant when her handkerchief fell off in the forest. You know, and so I think here she is, she's exposed. And I guess for readers of this particular novel, you know, Tess has fallen asleep again, and it's not safe to go to sleep. Bad things happen, you know, and the horse got killed, and now in a sense she's gotten killed. So I think we're supposed to be kind of worried that she's going to sleep. It's not safe to be sleeping. Yeah. So I think, of course, it was already shocking enough for the audiences when that was often the way that they would indicate what had happened, by someone turning up pregnant, in case the audience didn't get it the first time. But no, I think that at this time, actually describing the event more concretely is not something that
they would have done. Yeah. I mean, the only way it's made explicit is that with this idea of, it's again this kind of fate thing, that maybe it was some retribution, when indeed may admit the possibility of a retribution lurking. Doubtless some of Tess's mailed ancestors rollicking home from a fray had dealt the same measure even more ruthlessly. But that's as explicit as it gets. I mean, I was clear what had happened, but I did have to put the book the first time I read it down and ask Grace, did what I think happened really just happen?
Well, you know, since we're talking about it, it's not only a bad thing to do, but he said he wasn't going to do it. He said he wasn't going to, you know, back with the earlier scene, he said, not against your will. And of course, there he's talking about other things, but I thought that was pretty important, because
like, I'll never touch you again against your will, or something.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of my questions about Alec, and I don't think it matters in terms of moral evaluation of his character, but it's just sort of interesting to me. When he said that, did he mean it? Because there are several times that I think I don't know, there were times that I wrote things in the margin like, is he purely evil or also stupid? Does he really not understand what's happening here? Is it totally willful, or is he a little bit driven by forces he's not completely in control of? At times it felt like he was being honest about that, but that he would just, you know, violate that capriciously later.
Yeah, I had the same question, and I've tried to answer it for myself, and this may or may not be correct, but my impression of Alec is that he, you know, the first time I read this book and I got to that chapter where he rapes her, I was terrified from the moment they entered the forest that was going to happen. And then when he left her there, and Thomas Hardy says that he really didn't know where he was, I was like, oh, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe he is, you know, like just legitimately lost, going to go find out where they are and then take her home.
He was buying more time with her and wanted to, but not that this was his explicit intention in taking her deep into the woods.
Right. And I don't think that it was his explicit intention. When he goes back and he sees her, that image that we're talking about, this, you know, beautiful, youthful innocence amongst the dead leaves, he can't help it, I guess. And in that moment, it occurs to him like, this is what's going to happen. Even though we see it coming, he doesn't. So I don't know if that makes the answer to your question, like, yes, he is just stupid, or if he's just like kind of playing out the part of fate.
And not exonerating him for, you know, these, but there's sort of a evil capriciousness if combined with evil of intent. Sometimes it seems conscious and full of intent, and other times it just seems like he's just giving in to an impulse.
Right, exactly. I think he's dangerously impulsive, which is one of the things we see in that chapter with the dog cart, where he's going so fast down the hills, even though like they could both die. But he wants to show her his power in that moment, so he just goes for it.
Okay, well, let's keep moving forward, and then we can get to
Steven's got a question.
Oh, yeah.
Or hand up.
So I just want to make a real quick statement about their first meeting with the strawberries and everything. And I saw the rape scene inevitable from this moment, but I wrote down, because this is the first time I've read it, she seemed uncomfortable with him, but for like the wrong reasons. Like he would just forward. But the image that I got, you know how in like a cartoon where the innocent character, like I think of like a wolf, where it like grows scary behind them, and we see it, but they don't see it. You know what I mean? And it was like that to me the whole time, and I was like, well, I just know this is inevitable, and it's gonna happen. So that's all.
She's too innocent to be afraid of him. I always think about the point you made in the first discussion, Grace, about her mother suggesting she use her womanly wiles to get help with the delivery of the bees. And she doesn't even it's like they don't even speak the same language, because she's innocent to think of the world in those terms. So it's always describing, she does get vague apprehensions that something is off and something is wrong, and but she's never conscious, never seems conscious what those are, what the dangers are.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so, because we see it clear as day, and we also completely understand why she doesn't see it, and that makes it worse.
Yeah. Okay, so chapter 6, to me, chapter 6 is all about the pressure put on Tess to go through with claiming kin. And it's just, for those who read Bold as Sweef, there's the scene where they all gather together, and there's this explicit campaign to get Bold as Sweef to comply with sleeping with the Prussian officer. And I thought of this chapter in connection with that one. It's not an explicit campaign on the part of the children in this case.
Just the children, though.
But there are just the children. But it does seem like there's this kind of united front to get her to go along with this.
Yeah. Well, where does she say it'll be fine if she uses her trump card or something like that? Is that not this chapter?
I'm not sure.
No, it's at the end of chapter
next chapter.
Yeah. Okay.
He's a handsome man. There's that amazing scene with the diamond ring where the little kid says, "Why did he keep putting his hand up to his mustachers?" to show off the diamond ring and make it clear what he had to offer.
Which maybe this is a silly thing to say. I'll say it anyway. There in the Count of Monte Cristo, there's a character who's super shady and is like, just straight up criminal, has like killed his stepmother. And he is given a bunch of money by the Count to pretend that he's someone he's not. And he immediately takes all that money and turns it into a diamond ring so that he can wear it on his finger and carry it around with him, so that it's not like easily stolen or anything. He can always have it in his face. And so maybe this is a connection that doesn't really exist, but as soon as I saw the diamond ring, I was like, oh, he's like that character from the Count of Monte Cristo who is a horrible murderer.
I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. I don't know if somebody
I took care of it.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. So the children, wailing about the lost opportunity. She doesn't go. That puts pressure on her too. Her mother exaggerates the burden of her labors to induce guilt in Tess and make her want. So it's just this constant stream of pressure put upon her.
Yes.
And
that was what I wrote down too.
Okay. So what was your quote from this chapter?
Let's see. Okay, so my quote and my title are actually the same.
Okay.
My title / quote is "A Species of Dolorifuge."
And what does that
So it says, the children who had made use of this idea of Tess being taken up by their wealthy kinsfolk as they imagined the other family to be, as a species of dolorifuge after the death of the horse, began to cry. So dolorifuge is like I think it might have been a word that Thomas Hardy made up using root words, but I saw something that might indicate that, but I could be wrong. But anyway, it's something that you do to reduce pain. And so they cry to reduce the pain, and she leaves to reduce the pain of her guilt and the duty she feels she owes to her family. So that's what I chose.
Okay, perfect. I mean, we picked up on the same theme, which is just the pressure put upon her and how it drives her into making this choice, this disastrous choice. So I just chose as the quote, "I will go," said Tess.
I will go.
I will go. And my chapter title was "Thus It Was Arranged." So it's same idea, just choosing the moment before or the moment after the decision is made, I think.
Yeah. And I always, when I'm, because I play this game with my classes where we come up with the chapter titles for books that don't have chapter titles. And I always lean towards the more dramatic myself. So I'm going to try to find the I don't know even the word I would use for it, but the ones that kind of like lend you a sense of, what's this chapter going to be about?
That's probably a good principle for coming up with chapter titles.
Like to look at some of the ones in the chat.
Yes.
So Stefan says an ill omen after those rose pricked her chin.
That was a front runner for me too.
Yeah, ill omen from Wind as well. Nixon, she thought this an ill omen. So a lot of ill omens. And Molly,
I think the only problem with an ill omen is that it doesn't differentiate from any other moment in the entire book so far.
And Molly and Steve chose who wrote the letter.
Oh gosh. Oh, that moment where it said it appeared to be in a masculine hand.
I hate him.
Yes.
Hate him.
Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so on to chapter 7.
Chapter 7.
So again, going back to something you highlighted from chapter 1 with the white dress and the red ribbon. So that her innocence and her kind of unconscious womanliness, that was really featured prominently in this chapter as her mother tries to deliberately dress her up seductively, and she just has no consciousness of what that means or what it will bring. So a broader pink ribbon than usual. We still got the ribbon to indicate that aspect of her character.
Exactly.
And then again, as I said, the misery layered upon misery. So after the last chapter of incessant efforts to persuade her to go, at the end of this chapter, we have both the children and Mrs. Derbyfield regret. Well, the children are, afterwards sad to see her having gone. And Mrs. Derbyfield says, oh, maybe that wasn't a good idea after she's all ready.
Oh my gosh, that part made me tear up too, just having read before and knowing what comes of this, her being like, oh, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. I'm like, you think?
Anything else you want to say about this chapter?
Do you mind if I just read a passage that just made me, I wrote wow in the margin. It just truly, tell him I'll sell him the title. Not for less than £1,000. Tellin, I'll take £1,000. Well, I'll take less when I come to think of it. He'll adorn it better than a poor broken down feller like myself can. Tellin he shall hae it for 100, but I won't stand upon trifles. Tellin he shall hae it for 50, for £20. Yes, £20. That's the lowest. Dammy, family honor is family honor, and I won't take a penny less.
Yeah.
This when they're basically selling their daughter. So it just shows that nothing is sacred to that guy who is like just talking about how everything is sacred that has to do with him. So that just stood out to me as being particularly Thomas Hardy-esque. So I just wanted to share.
Yeah. Looks like we have a hand up.
He haggled himself down from the chat. Yeah.
Sorry, can I jump in?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely noted that, and the character is supposed to be a businessman, like he's supposed to be the one like
The peddler.
going to market and trading goods, and like it's just like you see why he's in the position that he's in, because this is the kind of thoughts that he puts forward. He starts with 1,000 and just gives it all away. So I thought that was very interesting to show like a little more depth on his poor business decisions.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the other line about him that I also underlined. Derbyfield was what was locally called a slack-twisted fellow. He had good strength to work at times, but none of the times could be relied on to coincide with the hours of requirement.
Yeah.
Stefan also had his hand up.
I just found it funny that the father was the one who set all this in motion, and then he all of a sudden just seems to be the guy just sitting in the chair, doesn't care anymore. You know, like that was the interesting thing of the day or that week, and then now he's just kind of sitting passively by while the wife is doing all the
pressure
operations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he's just sitting in the chair and just doesn't care anymore, and just kind of, put off his nap for a moment just to send her on her way. So I just thought it was interesting.
And for Molly and Steve, the chapter title, "Do What You Like with Me, Mother."
Oh, that's painful.
It's painful, but it's a good choice for that reason.
Uh-huh.
Do you want to share yours?
My quote or my title?
Yes.
Or as a quote, I chose, "Then she put upon her the white frock that Tess had worn at the club walking, the airy fullness of which, supplementing her enlarged coiffure, imparted to her developing figure an amplitude which belied her age and might cause her to be estimated as a woman when she was not much more than a child." So it was that white dress, red ribbon image that, because that seems like the focus here is turning her into the seductive woman when she is only a child.
Yeah. I also chose that. I just shortened it to the end, and might cause her to be estimated as a woman when she was not much more than a child. But yeah, same thing.
So your chapter titles?
My chapter title, I want to make sure I get it right. I chose "Goodbye, My Maid."
Oh. Yeah. Okay. I put 2, I cheated on this one, and it was her trump card and pink ribbon, both images emphasizing the seductive exterior.
Yeah. Those are
Okay. So now we're on to chapter 8, which is
Caleb has his hand up.
Oh, sure.
Looks like one question.
Yeah, sorry, can I say one more thing? So the trump card in this, I find it like really interesting. There were several times when it made mention of the mother, like 3 times in a row, the mother's intelligence, like 3 times in a row. It's like, she's not that quite smart, and that sort of thing. And then at the end, she says, maybe she'll use her trump card, her face,
which she got
like I did, like I did. And you see who she's with, and it's just so tragic. Like, this is how you spent your trump card, like
to get this life with this man.
Life.
Yeah,
I'm not laughing because it's funny.
No, it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah.
Okay, so the cart ride.
Yes, the one that I already had to talk about, because
the one that you already had to talk about. So one thing that I became conscious of, there's so much horror in here. It might be a worthwhile time to pause and say, so why are we here in the first place? Why are we reading this novel? And there's a lot we could say about that. And I think you and I ought to make an effort to emphasize that as we go. But one of the things, okay, I mentioned before that I can't myself, I don't know if anybody else can, come up with a better example of a purely malevolent universe. Well, I do find value in having such a dramatic depiction of a purely malevolent universe view. So that, when I use that phrase, a malevolent universe perspective, I can invoke the feeling of inhabiting this universe the universe of Tess. And that gives a powerful reality to that perspective. I'm not one, I don't think, who holds that perspective myself. So I just, put on the Thomas Hardy lens to look at the world, and I know what it means to have a malevolent universe outlook, and I know it in a powerful way where everything is integrated around that. Now, that alone would not be reason to read a novel. I mean, there's another point that I always try to make to people who are reluctant to read things that they're philosophically unaligned with, or sense of life, sensibility unaligned with, is if the writer is a genius, and I do think Thomas Hardy is a genius, if the writer is a genius, then in the big picture, you might adamantly disagree with his philosophic views and his sense of life. But if he's a genius, then inescapably, undoubtedly, there are going to be hundreds of moments that are completely true within that framework. True in the sense of revealing something about the nature of certain human beings, or true in the sense of giving you a sharpened view of a particular visual scene, heightening your perception of the world by giving it this emphasis. True in this sense of being very, using language to the best of its potential. Capturing beauty or capturing insight, using language in ways that in ordinary conversation we don't hear or don't experience, but having it be this distilled and intensified. So there are all these aspects of inhabiting this universe that I really relish, even though I'm so angry about everything that happens and so disgusted by the characters that I'm encountering.
Yes, I really, really appreciate the way that you said that, because I've struggled with that thought myself for a long time and how to put it into words. And the best way that I've come up with so far is by saying these words, which don't encapsulate so beautifully everything that you just said, but I'll say it anyway. I would worship at Thomas Hardy's feet, but I would never have a beer with him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just I know that if you don't make it explicit, there can be almost a feeling of guilt at enjoying the novel. Why am I enjoying this misery?
Yes.
But there is something to be enjoyed, and I think it is I often write in the margin poetry. I'll just write poetry in the margin because something is put with such poetic beauty that I marvel at it. And there's a real there's an interesting kind of sense of life, almost psychoepistemological satisfaction in experiencing the things captured so with such profound insight and poetry, even if what's captured is awful.
Yes, exactly. And this is also how that feeling exactly is how I feel when I read George Eliot. Like when I read Middlemarch, I was marveling the entire time. I also feel like that was more in line with my sense of life than this one was, but yes, I completely relate.
Shoshana, I don't know if you're willing to share what you told me about Hardy and Eliot, but Shoshana, I just love that line so much.
Well, there was sort of a, when they were trying to figure out who the pseudonym belonged to, some people thought it was Hardy, but the thing is, it doesn't really make sense because he was too young, to be George Eliot. And so it must be, people who knew him and thought if he's trying to write a novel, it would be like that because she's the older one, the more experienced one. But there's a sense in which there's something the same about, the way they describe things, the way that you could do a mashup. The characters could meet each other, except of course in her books, well, things do not go wrongly for the characters who are firm and virtuous. She doesn't.
It's not so malevolent.
It's not so loaded dice against them.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to put them together, but
what Shoshana said to me was that at the
Oh,
time,
yeah.
people considered it flattering that
Yes,
of Elliot that
Yeah.
people thought, yeah, go ahead.
because he was supposed to be gifted, and he was a poet. And she tried to write poetry, but didn't work out too well. But just saying. But I think that now, she wrote Middlemarch. She's the greater artist, and so the flattery kind of goes the other way.
Yeah.
What's sort of interesting, I guess, for me is that I think that if she had been doing this novel, we probably would have gotten more internally about some of the characters than we do, because that was very interesting to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
that's
remember
a lot-
sorry, go ahead.
a lot of her poetry is applied to like uncovering the human psyche and really getting inside someone's head, and we don't see a lot of that here.
Well, I mean, the question you were asking a little bit ago about Alec, he seems to have some good qualities. What's that all about? And she was very good at showing characters who seem to have some good qualities, and women trust them and so on. And maybe they can be redeemed, maybe they can't, or maybe they do horrible things to start murdering people. So she would decide it.
I see.
Yeah,
So we're left to infer more here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas she didn't
think
leave you
that's-
hanging like that. She would make sure you had a full understanding of the person, which was part of the supreme level of genius involved.
Middlemarch. Yeah.
I mean,
Ginger Mills has her hand up.
Oh yeah. Hi, Ginger.
Hi. So I'm a little nervous now. I'm hoping that there might be something more to hope for in the story besides the genius of the writer. Should I prepare myself to just be tortured this whole time?
I absolutely refuse to answer that question and forbid anybody else to answer it either. So sorry, you're just gonna have to go along on the journey and decide afterwards.
All right,
He asked you the
fair
same
enough.
thing this morning.
I will feel obligated. He did. Joseph texted me the same question. And I said, what did you think were the odds I was going to answer that question? So I will just do my best to emphasize along the way everything that I think is so enormously valuable about it. Let me say one
Yen
thing
also
about-
has her.
Okay, quickly, let me just say one thing about chapter 8, and then you can take another comment. One of the things that, because this is another emphasis of the value, so the cart scene. One thing I love about how much I hate that scene is that Hardy seems very skilled at creating scenes that are both metaphorically significant and completely contribute to the dramatic action and the feeling of the chapter. So I think that's true of the thing with the strawberry. I mean, obviously metaphorically significant, but also there's something about that scene itself where you're seeing him exercise his like forceful pressure on her and her innocence. But this cart scene, you said your heart was beating. I mean, your heart is beating at the scene where she's just, careening away from her green valley of innocence into this gray land in front of her. So there's so much about it that's symbolic, but I always dislike authors who use symbolism at the expense of drama, or where it becomes kind of an intellectual exercise to figure out what the symbol is as opposed to feeling. So in this case, it's metaphorically significant, it's symbolically significant, but you feel it the whole time. You're terrified because it's a cart that's driving recklessly out of control and she's having to grip onto him for dear life. And so there's so many scenes like that where I think it just works dramatically and symbolically at the same time, and it's all unified into giving you this one intense feeling.
The unification of that is one of the reasons that I love Thomas Hardy as much as I do, even given all the things we've said.
Yeah. Okay, question, comment?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. I have a very hard time balancing, well, I have the sense of dread when I'm reading this, I'm like, ah, and then beautiful language and all the things that you're emphasizing. So I don't know if you have any tips for non-literature teachers who are just readers who want to enjoy the reading process itself. And this is really helpful what you're saying, like to keep those things in mind, but at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, it just seems like everything's so doomed.
It's an interesting thing because it's something that I can give advice about and make suggestions, but it's a bit contrived for me because I don't feel the same way. I've never felt like the book has to align with my philosophic beliefs for me to enjoy it. I don't experience it that way. I experience it, and so I have to sort of step back and put myself in that mindset and ask, well, why might somebody feel that way? Or and I think the best advice I can give is just to, I think of it as kind of relishing the lens that the book is giving you, as opposed to the view on the other side of the lens. I don't know if that's helpful, but relishing I think that the joy, the strange joy and satisfaction I get is from putting on, I think of it as putting on X-ray glasses. And there are some authors who have the power to give you that. The thing that I derive no satisfaction from is an author who doesn't have the power to do that at all. If it's just badly written or not insightful or not, then I get no enjoyment or pleasure out of it. But if I do have that feeling that everything is more sharply delineated now when I'm in this world, in a powerful way, then I take satisfaction in that, because what I figure is that I can carry away that skill. I'm not conscious of that at the time, but I think that's the impact it has on me, is that it's elevating my ability to understand the world, to see things clearly, to have insights into things. It's an elevation. It's a feeling of elevation. Even though the conclusion, that is being reached is not one that I sympathize with. So as I mentioned, when some of you were here, my two daughters just graduated from a great book school this weekend, and they read some of the most horrific, works of great, of the great books that you can. But the whole idea of it is that you're getting among other things, it's raising questions that you might not ask yourself if you weren't exposed to them, from the perspective of somebody who's answering the question in a way you don't agree with. But the sheer fact of raising the question, of exposing you, alerting you to this sort of way of looking at the world, is enormously valuable. So I think that will be my shorthand for now, is just value the lens as opposed to the sight.
So I have a question to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have to separate two things. One is, what did they see? What are the lens is a good way to look at it, because they're exposing things to you that you might not have otherwise seen yourself, versus the outlook of those, or the conclusions from them.
Mm-hmm.
So the conclusion you can keep to the side and disagree with, but it's important to be exposed to those other things. One of the values, for example, so you can see how you don't want to live.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the, am I understanding the point correctly?
I think so. I usually recommend that people, I've used the phrase in Read With Me, suspend philosophic disbelief. So while you're inhabiting the universe, I generally recommend just kind of throwing yourself into it and not spending too much time evaluating how it accords with your own. Afterwards, I strongly encourage you to reflect on how it accords with your own worldview. But I think for me, the emphasis is less on learning if it was just an instruction manual on how not to live, I don't know that I'd find that much satisfaction or value in it, though I do think there's value there. It's more what they do. It's the positives of what he does have to offer. And he is a brilliant writer. He really, truly is a brilliant writer. So it's the value of what he is able to capture that's real, because as I said, there's so much in it that's real, even if the conclusions I wouldn't agree the ultimate, sum total of them, I wouldn't agree with. So even just, the image of the guy brandishing the diamond ring to show off his wealth. Well, that's a great picture and image of a villainous character who's flaunting something to manipulatively get what he wants. I mean, it's great. That's value. I love having that image and having the innocent little boy, like, why was he doing that? Because of the innocence of the child emphasized in that scene is great too. So there's so much like that I find value in.
And it kind of contributes to a larger background against which you can live a more meaningful life if you have these images that you can attach to things that you encounter in other works of literature, even in real life. Like maybe you'll never see someone like brandishing their diamond ring to smooth their mustache, but you might see something that is like that and you're like, oh, bad news.
I know what that means. Yeah, right. So it could be something entirely different and even positive, a gesture somebody does that means something good about them. But you are becoming habituated to looking at the meaning behind those gestures when you're reading someone like Thomas Hardy.
Right. So you're marveling at the fact that he's able to see these things and how well he's able to communicate them.
Yeah, when I
Right.
step back, I'm marveling at that. When I'm reading it, I'm just experiencing it. I just feel that's what it feels like.
Right.
That's helpful. And I just wanted to add that it shows Hardy's mastery of this, because I have read Crime and Punishment and all kinds of like things where I would not agree with the philosophy. However, the sense of dread so far has been just so overwhelming that Hardy is really doing it well, because I totally
you feel it. Yeah.
Reading Thomas Hardy is a visceral experience.
Yeah, he is unsparing in creating that sense of dread. It's everywhere, all the time.
All the time.
Okay, did you have a quote from chapter 8?
So I must admit, in the chaos of moving, I forgot to do the quote from this.
No problem. Well,
but I do have a title.
You have a title, okay.
So do you want to share your quote and then I'll share my title?
My quote from which I drew my title was, "He was inexorable and she sat still, and D'Urberville gave her the kiss of mastery."
So that's where I got my title as well. So I wanted to make the title "The Kiss of Mastery," but I felt like the more essential part of the chapter was rather this idea of mastery as a whole, because it wasn't just the kiss, it was also everything he was doing to show mastery. And so if I had to like be limited to the phrase from the book, it would be the kiss of mastery. But what I wrote in my notes was that I would want to title this chapter "Demonstrations of Mastery," because it's not just that, but kiss of mastery.
But the kiss
So
of
I'm not
mastery,
cheating.
he's showing his mastery and his control over her.
Mhm.
Okay, on to chapter 9. So we have the introduction of Mrs. D'Urberville. We have how Alec overcomes Tess's apprehensions. And this is where, this was another one of those scenes where I thought, okay, is when he kind of puts himself behind the wire fence and promises he's not going to touch her. Does he mean it when he's saying it? I'm not entirely sure. It sort of felt that way, but then you could also convince yourself that it's purely manipulative to soften.
He means it in that moment, I think.
I think so too. I don't know what other people think about that, but you could make it more calculating and devious, and it would also
fit
with this character. But anyway, it kind of creates the layers of ominousness here too, where you just see her starting to settle in, like maybe he's not so terrifying as her instincts tell her. And there's even a little sort of playful moment with the whistling instruction.
Although, have you heard of the English proverb, I think.
Mhm.
Whistling girls and crowing hens are neither good for God nor men. The American version is whistling girls and crowing hens always come to some bad ends.
Oh, gosh.
And do you want to know why I know that? Because I only knew that this past week when I was reading aloud to the second grade, because
In
it's in
Farmer Boy.
Boy.
Oh my
So
God.
I'm reading it and I had just read that chapter the night before and I was like,
Oh
there's the
boy.
hens, there's the whistling girl.
Amazing.
It always comes to some bad ends.
Amazing. Okay, at the very beginning I talked about scenes where it seems to sort of flesh out and give reality, but I'm not entirely sure of the purpose. What are we to make of the Mrs. D'Urberville character?
Oh,
I mean, that scene is so colorful and interesting, but I don't know.
So
Yeah.
my take on it, and take it, it's worth what you paid for it. The thing that stuck out most to me is the paragraph where it talks about all the ways in which Tess is mistaken in regards to her impression of this woman. And one of the lines in there says that this woman has never heard that she is supposedly related to Tess. Like Alec never told her about that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so what I think her purpose is to just kind of demonstrate, because she's nothing. She can't really move.
The overall scheme that's happening.
Yeah, she demonstrates the scheme in the sense that she's nothing really, but Tess thinks she is.
Right.
So it shows the ways in which Tess is mistaken over what's really going on here, because she's not really here feeling like she thinks she is. She's really here.
She's blind. She has no, and so there, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So she's blind to the whole situation. She has no agency here. This is all Alex doing.
Mhm.
And also it describes her as being bitterly fond of her son.
That was creepy to me too. Whereas Tess has the idea that she doesn't like her son very much, but it says Mrs. D'Urberville was not the first mother compelled to love her offspring resentfully and to be bitterly fond.
Right. So more evidence that he is everything we think we have concluded about him.
Mm-hmm. Even though we get that like somewhat playful scene, it's followed by the scene where he is like sneaking into the room to watch her whistle, which I never thought whistling was that bad. I was like, what's wrong with whistling? And then I was thinking like
lips. Mm-hmm.
So much about the lips.
Yeah. Well, her lips are emphasized feature right from the start.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that the scene with the curtains was absolutely creepy and ominous.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is why I'll just go right into my chapter title, which was take those lips away. Really?
Yeah, I did the same one.
Shakespeare. It's from Shakespeare, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
and I forget exactly the reference, but it's something that's related to this.
Yeah, but it to me, it captured both his efforts to kind of warm himself to her and make her more vulnerable to him, and also it's also warning in the same vein. It's warming her to him while warning her.
Yes, precisely. That is it.
Yeah,
so
and
that's why I chose it too.
I don't know if you had a quote here. I did, but I just chose the quote about him cultivated in her by a trust in his presence, cultivated in her by playful dialogue and by jestingly calling her his cousin when they were alone, removed much of her original shyness of him without, however, implanting any feeling which could engender shyness of a new and tenderer kind.
That last part was mine.
Okay. It's so brilliantly said again. Shyness of a new and tender. It didn't make her feel any romantic feelings for
it. Just made her feel less grossed out.
It just made her feel less grossed out, which is, what was accomplished in that whole scene.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Part of the plan, the scheme. Oh, I have a question for you and for everybody else in chapter
Okay.
10.
In chapter 10.
Because in chapter 10.
Okay.
Are we moving on to
Yes,
chapter
move
10?
on to chapter 10. Yeah.
I just realized I might have like inadvertently stepped on your toes.
No.
So chapter 10, I had this strange experience where, because I've been in the midst of moving, I was doing some of my reading on the Gutenberg website and then some in my book. And when I read it on the Gutenberg website, there was this scene about this silent dance amongst like mud in a garden. And when I picked up my book and read the same chapter, it was gone. It wasn't there.
Wait, inside the barn or that dance?
Yeah, the scene was gone. It's not in this version.
What? Was it this one? Because this is one of my I cringe at this quote and love it so thoroughly at the same time. Through this floating, fusty debris of peat and hay, mixed with the perspirations and warmth of the dancers, and forming together a sort of vegeto-human pollen, the muted fiddles feebly pushed their notes in marked contrast to the spirit with which the measure was trodden out.
Not in this book.
Not in that book. What?
Not in this book.
That
not in Molly's either.
So if not in your book, that's fascinating because my chapter title, my quote, which are the same, they're identical. Well, no, that's not true. It would still make sense. But I feel like this scene contributes so much to what I see as the essence of this chapter, which is she's grossed out by what she's witnessing inside the barn and trying to keep herself removed from that because of the like sordid sensuality of what's happening. And so but at the same time, she's dependent on these people to be her escort home.
Yeah.
So she's keeping herself outside of that, trying to figure out whether to go home and how. And then later it's the same sort of situation, but because of the conflict.
Yeah.
With that.
In this version, there's nothing about that. It's pretty much just she arrives. She is waiting for her friends to take her home. Alec sees her and says, "I'll take you home." And she says no. And then it just goes right to the part where she's walking home later.
So you all missed out on.
Well, I don't know if everybody did, but at least me and
so
Molly,
a bunch of people missed out on the phrase vegeto-human pollen. You shouldn't be able to go through this book without encountering that phrase.
Right. No, and I did read it on the Gutenberg website, so I was able to read it at least once, but the one that I read more closely was this one. I just have that. But I do recall that scene so vividly from the first time that I read the book, because I have a different edition. I have like several editions.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wait, what's going on? What's happening? Where are these pages from my book? I even checked to see if I had a misprint. I was like, nope, 64, 65.
It's such a it contributes overall to what I see as the function of this chapter, which is, I just wrote vice everywhere. She's this innocent, has this innocent purity, and she has, befriended these people, but now there's this lascivious dancing happening. Everybody is drunk. Nobody is better than Hardy at describing drunkenness. I think I could spend time just reviewing all the descriptions he has of the state of drunkenness.
There is a particular, this is so unrelated, and I'm sorry to even bring it up, but I have to. There is a related, there's a description of someone who's drunk in Far from the Madding Crowd. That, and then also one of the most dramatic scenes to exist in any piece of literature, are great reasons to read that book.
Okay.
But anyway.
Well, let's pause on drunkenness for a moment. They followed the road with a sensation that they were soaring along in a supporting medium, possessed of original and profound thoughts, themselves and surrounding nature forming an organism of which all the parts harmoniously and joyously interpenetrated each other. But that's all inside, it's it's almost like the line is blurred between them and the world around them because of the state that they're in.
It's so well done.
And also before that, it says, yet, however terrestrial and lumpy their appearance just now to the mean and unglamored eye, to themselves, the case was different. So they've drunk themselves into believing there's something more than terrestrial and lumpy.
Terrestrial and lumpy.
That competes with vegeto-human pollen.
Human pollen. It's so good. These are more examples of why I love Thomas Hardy. These phrases that I then want to use. Like,
yes.
I want to bring them into my vocabulary. I also want to not have to use that to describe somebody, but I trust you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we go from, so she's faced with this choice of walking, staying around, wading through the, lasciviousness that they're all engaged in, and then walking home with this group of drunken people, or offered an escort from Alec. So it's this horrific choice between vice in both directions.
And ultimately the choice is even taken away from her.
And then the choice is taken away from her when everybody turns on her. So my choice for quote and title here was out of the frying pan into the fire.
We keep choosing the same ones. I chose that too for both.
Yeah.
Molly and Steve say, so not only is it a blighted world, one can escape it into a better one by drinking hard.
By drinking. Yeah, well, that's what I love that scene. It was a very similar description in the inn when it would describe Mrs. Derbyfield, the feeling that she would have when she went there, where you escape the woes of the world by kind of dissolve. It almost makes it feel like you dissolve into this state of hazy drunkenness. It's awful.
And Caleb has his hand up.
Yeah.
There were a few really striking things that were said. So when the yellow lights struggle with blue shades, I really like that one a lot.
Oh, me too.
And then having waited so long, it was necessary to wait longer. That was just brilliant. And then finally, in the dancing, emotion was the matter of the universe, and matter but an advantageous intrusion to keep you from spinning where you wanted to spin. My gosh.
Yeah.
Anyway, those just absolutely thrilled me. And when you're talking about what do you take away from this tragic moment, these very specific, very honest, very unique perspective, right? To say this is the thing you've seen before, and here is it spelled out in a way that gives you joy to look at it again. I don't know. This is crazy.
Oh, I totally agree. I remember both of the phrase quotes you're mentioning very well. And there's something incredibly valuable about having drunkenness so powerfully described to you. That in itself is a value.
Yeah.
I love the passages or the phrases you picked out. I love those lines.
Yeah. Okay, and on to chapter 11. And the way I phrased the question here, which I've already asked, but I like this phrasing of it, is how conscious is Alec of his own vice? That was the real question in my mind, but I formulated it better in my notes than I could recapture here. How conscious is he of his own evil? And I'm never quite sure of that.
I don't know that I am either.
Yeah.
Grace had a really good comment about, I think a couple of chapters ago, when you asked, did he mean it when he was on the other side of the fence?
Yeah.
And you said, in that moment.
In that moment, he meant it.
Yeah, and there's another line. He had in fact ridden quite at random for over an hour, taking any turn that came to him in order to prolong companionship with her.
Right.
So it kind of emphasizes he's just going randomly.
He's just going moment to moment. He just wants to spend more time with her until
so it's like evil randomness. It's not consistently calculated evil. It's evil randomness.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best way to capture it, because he is lying to her. He did pass the road home so that he could prolong this time with her. But I definitely don't think in that moment his intention is to rape her. I don't think he's conscious, has that conscious intention, but he will consciously put himself in a position of just letting random impulses govern him, evil random impulses govern him.
Mm-hmm.
All right, quote or title. I will confess now, I could not come up with a title for this.
I did my best. I just took it from the quote.
Okay.
Why it was that upon this beautiful feminine tissue, sensitive as gossamer and practically blank as snow yet, there should have been traced such a coarse pattern as it was doomed to receive.
Mhm.
And so I chose my title, A Coarse Pattern.
A coarse pattern is perfect. So what I wrote in my notes was, I'm at a loss. Something about the white nebulousness and beautiful feminine tissue and the blackness. That's what I wanted, the white nebulousness and the blackness, but a coarse pattern was the pattern imposed on the beautiful white tissue. So yeah, that's perfect. All right, so we have endured this descent into and misery. Any other kind of I don't know, bird's eye thoughts that we want to take on this chapter on this section before we close it and move on to Maiden No More?
Well, I'll just share my experience reading this for the first time about a year and a half ago, I guess. I would listen to it on an audiobook, and then I would, when I had time, go back and reread it more closely. And I would listen to it while I was getting ready in the morning, which when it got to this seemed like a bad idea. So I was listening to this part and I got to the end of phase the first, and I thought, did that really just happen? Did I understand that correctly? I had the same thought that you did.
Yeah.
And then I heard the title of the next part and the narrator saying phase the second, Maiden No More. It was at that point that I just broke down in tears and I went to my husband for comfort. He's like, were you listening to your book? I was like, yes.
So I did the quote that I wrote down for the last chapter was an excuse me, an immeasurable social chasm was to divide our heroine's personality thereafter from that previous self of hers who stepped from her mother's door to try her fortune at Trantridge Poultry Farm. So Maiden No More and an immeasurable social chasm is what's to follow. She's not the same person that she was, and she doesn't occupy the same place in the world that she did. It's really, yeah, it's horrific.
And all just because of his evil whims.
Evil whims, evil wantonness. Yeah.
Ollie's title was As He Desired.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. His desire, his evil impulse, his evil actions impulsively taken change her entire identity. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or thoughts anybody has before we wrap things up?
Let's read a couple from the chat.
Sure.
Georgiana said, chapter, it was to be.
Mm.
And then also from Molly and Steve, divorce from society, the way Raskolnikov is.
Mm. Yeah, but against her wasn't an action that she had taken. So it was to be, I take that as being as he does, the same thing as, what he willed was to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, I will give the next assignment, which is chapters 12 through 17. Chapters 12 through 17.
Okay.
And we'll meet again at 8 a.m. next Sunday. This was so much fun for me.
Such
Thank
a
you,
sad
Alec.
ending.
What's that?
Such a sad ending, such a down
Oh,
note.
to end this section on? I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Such a bloody
Um,
ending.
Yeah, next time should we end on a happy moment?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Mhm.
Or bring in some other anecdote to share. Maybe from a different universe.
Yes, I know.
How about one from this universe? You can picture me. I'm about to go destroy a couch with a hatchet.
There we go. There we go.
Now, wait, true emotional release from the
Yes.
chapter.
There
Destroy
we
it.
go.
Destroy it.
Destroy a couch with a hatchet.
That's fantastic. Why? Why will you do this?
It doesn't fit through the door, and I got to get it out.
They moved this weekend and discovered that their couch does not fit through the door, which poses the question of how it got in the first place. But she has theories.
We
Yeah.
had the exact same thing happen in our house, and we had to actually take a chainsaw to the couch. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
There you go.
I
it's
say
actually-
hatchet. We don't have a hatchet. I have to go find the means by which I'm going to destroy this couch. Maybe I can borrow your chainsaw.
lots of sawdust.
I can end on, it's not a happy note, but Grace, you know this well. Just in terms of Hardy's sense of life, poetic capacity and sense of life, there's a poem that has a line that I think is one of the most ingenious lines ever written and is so completely dismal.
Are you going to say the one that I think you're going to say?
I am. And I'm certain that it's the same one. If anybody took my poetry course, I mentioned it there, but it described a woman as her smile. Oh gosh.
The smile on your mouth was the deadest thing alive enough to have the strength to die.
The smile on your face was the deadest thing alive enough to have strength to die. So yeah, that's that's some writing talent used for very dismal purposes.
That was the line that got me to love Thomas Hardy.
Mhm.
I encountered it in a college course with my wonderful, I love that professor so much. But she shared that poem with us and she just wanted to revel in it with us. So she was like, are you ready for this? It has one of my favorite lines in all of poetry. And we got to it and I was like,
Wow.
no way.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, everybody. So we will see you again next Sunday at 8.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Lisa.
Lisa.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Grace. Bye.